Okay. Yeah. Okay. Hi everyone. We're here again from the Jakarta Biennale team, the curatorial team. I'm Farah. I'm the program director of the Jakarta Biennale. So I'm here to give introduction for our. This is the. I think this is like. I forgot to count. Already had several sessions of this monthly event already. And we've been joined by very fabulous and also very generous friends from the local and international art scene, especially with the help of our curators here with us, Grace Sambo, and Chita and Rachel, Akmalia Rizkita and Rachel Suryata, who are now inviting Asep Topan, actually who's been involved with the previous Jakarta Biennale. He was the curator of the 2015 Jakarta Biennale, so he's a very good friend of ours. And also to Abby, thanks so much, Abby Kanain, who give her time to share her perspectives on this. Actually, this is a very interesting topic. Living in the surreal, exhibiting the mundane. And Grace told me that much of the conversation today actually is going to be based quite much from her writings, and maybe Asep also, right? Like both Grace and Asep contributed as writer for this upcoming book that we're going to launch by the end of August. It's called Spectrum 2021, Spectrum 2021, 6 Perspectives of Contemporary Art in Indonesia. So it's still released in Bahasa for now, but yes, we're working on if there's much interest to, hopefully, probably there will be like a English version in the future. But we are very proud to have all these speakers and to join us here. And also, yeah, so this is also like a sneak peek for our upcoming Jakarta Biennale publication is the Spectrum, so you can wait for it for the next update. So that's from me. So I can give the session to Grace. Please do, Grace.
Thank you. Thank you, Farah. I'm waiting for Cheetah's change of screen. Okay. Thank you, Farah. Hello, everyone. I'm Grace. I'm a member of the Jakarta Biennale 2021 ESOK curatorial team who runs this monthly event in forms of, like many forms actually. Some are panel talks like today, conversations, lectures, etc. And we do this as a way to open up our working process to the public, and also as a way to address and engage with issues that we are unraveling in the making of the biennial. Not limited to, but oftentimes focuses on exhibition making part of the biennial. This platform where this is a platform where we rehearse our thoughts, expand our research, as well as collect potential interests of the biennial stakeholders. And through this platform, by inviting fellow caretakers or experts, if you like, we hope to be taking an active role in the discourse that we want to be working with. Before I begin, let me thank the team behind the screen, JJ and Chamai from the multimedia team, Farah, our dear boss, Rachel and Chita, also Sally and Chingy from the curatorial team, and the panelists, Christy, Asep, and Abby, and all of you for being with us via YouTube or Facebook. As Farah mentioned, today's session is somewhat related to an essay I wrote for the Biennial and Jakarta Arts Council's recent publication titled Spectrum 2021. Of which my colleague from the curatorial team, Sally Texania and Asep, who's here, also contributed. I was dwelling on questions such as what can biennials do with and for artists' practices? how do biennials facilitate or grow artists' practices? How do we exhibit non-representational works? I was looking at the Jakarta Biennale's archives when posing such questions, hence the three works that we will be discussing today. And for this conversation, I thought of Asep because he wrote his master thesis on Moelyono, whose work was in Jakarta Biennale 2013. Abby because she did her master on the sculptural practices of Bianca Hester and Maddie Leach. Maddie, whose work was in Jakarta Biennale 2015. And Christy because she have worked with Wok The Rock on and off, but almost forever. And Wok's work is also in Jakarta Biennale 2013. And so I'm very pleased to be introducing you to Asep, Christy, and Abby. Also to be introducing the three of you to each other. And Christy unfortunately has a work emergency, so we will play her presentation later, and hopefully she will join us in the Q&A session. I'm not going to read the professional bios of Abby, Asep, and Christy because they exist in the many platforms that we have, but I will though read the framework of the conversation. Before I go into that, I will explain about how the panel will go. First, we will start with Asep, and then we go to Abby, and afterwards Christy, then we talks among us. Along the way, if any of you both in YouTube and Facebook have questions, please just write it down in the comment section. Rachel and Chita will deliver the question to us and we will address it either directly. We will decide how we address it, but we will be very grateful to get questions from you, also to see what you think about things, comments. It doesn't have to be questions, it can be comments, and yeah, any responses basically. Okay, so living in the surreal, exhibiting the mundane. Contemporary politics affair with various forms of capitalism and power-craving monsters are as surreal as its immediate impact on our social reality. It wouldn't even be much of a surprise to consider the cruelty of our day-to-day lives as surreal. Yet in the recent 2 decades, art practices seem to be more invested in the day-to-day activities, more rooted in the mundane, and interestingly less motivated in being exhibited, staged, or shown. Artistic practices seem to be driven by its necessity to simply happen. It has grown far from motivations such as expressing, claiming, divining, making, evaluating, etc. At times, we can argue that to some artists, it doesn't even matter anymore whether people at large would understand, accept, or agree upon what they do as art or not, let alone its type or its genre. What matters is that it happened in a particular situation where anyone involved had various chances of engagement with it, despite the level of awareness, consciousness, and tolerance. This conversation will be looking into the artworks of Maddie Leach, Moelyono, and Wok The Rock from the previous Jakarta Biennales, which had no representational motive, be it on a conceptual level, in the artists' practices themselves, and in its appearance in the exhibition. While attempting to sort of tinker in times like these, what can exhibitions do or be? I give the floor to Asep.
Hello, Grace. Thank you very much. And good afternoon, everyone. Abby, Christy, Chita, and also Rachel. First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this event. This is very. I'm very happy to receive this invitation because maybe this is the first time I invited to speak specifically about Pak Moelyono's work in 2013 Jakarta Biennale, and it has given me very huge opportunity to learn from him directly, and maybe that's the first time I was get in touch personally with Pak Moelyono. So as a background, I will start to share my presentation first. Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, do you want to make it full screen? You can.
Kayaknya gini aja deh, guys, biar.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's better to see it like this, because I have some notes out of this presentation as well. So as a background, I was the artist assistant and also liaison officer for Moelyono at that time, 2013 Jakarta Biennale, called Siasat, and the project presentation by Moelyono was titled "Art Goes to Village Tactic." I think it was not the original title for the project, because basically it was based on the activity that he did in Singkawang for the ECCD program. So Moelyono is an artist born in Tulungagung in 1957 and has been actively involved in the art within the community since the 80s, including workshop and also teaching children from village to village. He is also a painter, exhibiting his work regularly in the galleries, art space, even museum. And in 1993, this is one of the most important steps. I think he founded the Yayasan Seni Rupa Komunitas, or if we translate in English, Community Art Foundation, perhaps, and which aim to encourage the public to do art. And for him, I think this is a very beautiful statement as well, that artists should not express themselves in a natural manner by only making people the aesthetic object. And for him, art must be useful for society as well. And the reason why he's not only painting at that time was, he said that his concern as a painter, he said that he considered that the painter is unable to solve problem, maybe directly what he means. So that's why he also started to work in the community and so with community and creating such work. Maybe we could call at the now as community-based art practice or community art, etc. And becoming a teacher was a strategic way for Moelyono to approach the people, because, for example, when I asked why teacher, why teaching, because in the very beginning of his activities, it's quite awkward, to approach people or children or head of village as an artist, in the village. So I'm an artist. I would like to share my knowledge in the community. So it's quite awkward situation to say as an artist, but as a teacher, it's Pak Moelyono was accepted more easily in the community, because teacher is a normal occupation, right? And also after that, he also known as a guru gambar or drawing teacher later on. And in 97, he published a book titled Seni Rupa Penyadaran, or I have difficulties to find the translation. Maybe Grace could help me later. It could be conscientization of art or consciousness raising art, or maybe in Portuguese, consciencial de art, because this relate to the concept from Freire in talking about the critical pedagogy that I would like maybe mention later on when we talk about the work. That's why he also used this term penyadaran to define is practice, seni rupa penyadaran. This is the early drawing from workshop with the children in the village Dukuh Brumbun in 80s, I think. I cannot find the right date for this one. So this is a drawing workshop, and little bit about the Jakarta Biennale 2013. It was, for me, it was special event, not only exhibition. That's why I decided to research more deeply about this exhibition, as well as more specifically about Pak Moelyono's practice, because firstly, it was the first time the Biennale held in the very specific location. It was in the basement parking lot in Jakarta Theater in Central Jakarta as a main venue, I would say, and also there's a presentation and in Art and Ceramic Museum, sorry, and also several public spaces in Jakarta, like for example for murals, happenings, as well as performances. This is the third Jakarta Biennale as an international event. The first time was 2009, and then 2011 in Galeri Nasional as well, and then this is the third one, and includes 47 participants, not only artists, I would say, because of course artist group as well as art collective, and I think there's also curators collective as well, transit from Czech. So it's quite a variety of participants in the Biennale, and the idea of community-based art or art for community is very strong in this Biennale in particular. And artistic team, there were Ade Darmawan, Hafiz, and Nadia. They didn't call themselves as curator because there was no curators. I mean, people who titled curator in that Biennale. That's why they called the team as an artistic team that consists of these three people. This is images from the opening with the current president of Indonesia, Bapak Jokowi, and also ada Irawan Karseno as well, I think. Yeah, and this is one of the few display from Saleh Hussein Arabian Party. So we can see the apa ini namanya lubang angin gitu, hole for the I think this is for the air conditioner. So this is basically a basement for parking. This is the display, very different one. This is from in the Museum Senior Park dan Keramik, or Ceramic and Art Museum in West Jakarta. And this is mural from Guntur Wibowo in very specific location in Kampung Ambon. That also involved community in the process of the making of that mural as well. Yeah, more or less the whole exhibition venue, the main venue in the basement of Jakarta Theater, pretty much like this. This is by Serum. Thank you very much, Serum. This is the whole exhibition draft, the exhibition design. And then about the work itself, Pak Moelyono, I need to mention first about the early childhood care and development, because this is basically what Pak Moelyono presented in the Art Goes to Village tactic. So ECCD is the method of early education that emphasizes a holistic approach focusing on the child physical, emotional, social, as well as cognitive development. Pak Moelyono, I believe that also had this training before in India, and then implement this method in several locations in Indonesia with the help as well by the team of NGOs and also other participants for this project. And the objective of ACCD is to nurture the children for their physical and mental development to prepare them for schooling with right attitude and habit. So ACCD specifically targeted for children from the conception or before it was they were born until around age 5 or 6. And I think one of the most important thing in the implementation of ECCD is that it needs to be implemented based on the local culture and local context, and that's how I see Pak Moelyono's work is growing and also developing in many contexts in several cities in Indonesia. Of course, we have like very much diversity of local culture and also very different economic situation, cultural as well as political in some point. And yeah, these values should be understood first, and then the aim is to make children in the region or the area having more critical thinking of their reality. Therefore, they can be able to change their reality. So it's very much also related to the idea of critical pedagogy as well. So using art as well as I think he also see this as a cultural action. It's also a term that coined by Paulo Freire in his book. Yeah, this is the presentation of Art Goes to Village Tactic by Pak Moelyono. It is consists of modules 4.2 meter to 11 meter in the exhibition wall, and then teaching materials. There's also video documentation, and for the modules, actually Pak Moelyono has like thousands of modules. I remember helping him select more than 1,000 modules, because the agreement between the artist and the curator was that the maximum number of modules that can be presented was 1,000. So I select almost 1,000 modules with Pak Moelyono in around 1 week in Jakarta. And there's also a book here and also a video documentation. But one that missing is that it was became a discussion is also to practice this module inside the gallery, but it didn't happen. So the presentation implemented without the actual learning activities. This is image from Pak Moelyono speaking with the audience, the viewer. This is the process of repairing or making new module inside the exhibition space during the installation. So he used tomatoes for learning for learning in ACCD method, and and then about the presentation, this is very interesting because for Pak Moelyono, maybe we can see the English version first. Pak Moelyono admit that this is a challenge for him, because for the first time he asked about the to exhibit the work, but actually it was not the work, because at that time he said that he didn't have an artwork or painting or etc. But he has this concept, this idea, and that's why he think that this is very interesting, and he accept the Biennale invitation first because yeah, this was the first time he was invited to present his concept, and for him Jakarta Biennale 2013 Siasat no longer talks about how art becomes a medium of advocacy and a medium of action, which is only the expression, but there is an approach by the curator that trying to push the boundaries of how people see art, especially in the contemporary art, and that's also a challenge for curator, I think, and also for Pak Moelyono, how to display this quote unquote properly. And Pak Moelyono also considers the Biennale concept is interesting because it raises the siasat or art tactics for the community or society. And Pak Moelyono interprets this concept siasat as art that has emerged in the people's lives. So with this, he assumed that people no longer talk about artists having work in the studio, and all elements that that reality become the work of art. So it's kind of like the expansion of art in a way that still consists in many people. So that makes Pak Moelyono think this project is very interesting. And yeah, as I mentioned earlier, this project or this presentation very much influenced by the reading of Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And one of the most prominent he was one of the prominent thinker in critical pedagogy from Brazil. One of the key ideas is critical conciseness, also used by Moelyono for his book and also for his practice seni rupa penyadaran. And critical, in short, critical conciseness focuses on achieving in-depth understanding of the world, allowing for the perception and exposure of social and political contradiction. Critical conciseness also includes taking action against the oppressive element in one's life that are illuminated by that understanding. So I think that's very interesting combination, because using teaching method as well as art potential, and also the targeted audience or targeted people which are children that below 5 years. So this thing is very fundamental for this work, and maybe by looking at the exhibition alone we cannot grasp like the whole idea. But that's, I think, the challenge that that pretty much we discuss here. I think as this is the direct quote from him, that questioning the real activities outside the exhibition into and that move to the exhibition hall or exhibition space. And this goes to my last point about the discussion, further discussion. If we read about one example for the idea or the concept of relational art that articulated by Claire Bishop, for example, there are three agenda, and two of them, activation and authorship, was pretty much I would say distort in this presentation. So in my view, there are distortion that occur when the practice is moved from its actual place to the exhibition space as an artwork, or maybe not as an artwork, but to move the actual activities or happening to the exhibition space. The first, with regard to the activation agenda, in the Jakarta Biennale Siasat, the ECCD, the whole ECCD process, including module, are displayed passively without presenting interaction or direct involvement in the exhibition. Therefore, this presentation created a new layer of spectators. And if we look at this project previously in Singkawang, the people in that context were active spectators in the practice of ECCD. It is different when they were moved to the exhibition of Jakarta Biennale 2013. Visitor of the exhibition only became passive spectator that look at this module only as something that maybe they cannot touch, maybe they cannot interact with, because the value is shifting. And then the second one related to the authorship agenda is the loss of names of collaborators, such as NGOs, tutors, and of course a resident as well. Like, because Pak Moelyono also work with parents mostly, and also a younger teacher in this SCCD program. And for this exhibition, for the Jakarta Biennale, the sole name for this presentation is only Moelyono. So I think it's become problematic in a way, but that's also the question that he cannot answer, because there are there are very different practice as well as implementation in the project. And because this is the first time for Moelyono to present this project, the ECCD module, etc., I believe afterward, I think he also presented that this presentation again. And if I'm not mistaken, maybe this is different project, but later on he also presented this or his community-based art project or practice in Tokyo with Grace in Sansora exhibition, also in collaboration with Serum. So yeah, maybe if necessary, Grace also can give also maybe different perspective on that, because I didn't see the show myself in Tokyo. I think that's for me now. I hope we can continue in the discussion session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Asep. I have probably a quick comment just about the translation before I hand to Abby, because I think it's really interesting the term that he kept using. Sorry, you can hear my dogs playing with each other. The term that Pak Mul kept using for his practice is seni rupa penyadaran, which, as you mentioned, it somewhat has roots to Paulo Freire. But actually, the first time the term came to him, and afterwards he decided to use it, was in 1988, when Adiati wrote a seminal exhibition review titled Seni Rupa Penyadaran. I oftentimes translate it to art for conscientization, which is also not an English word, but you somehow can still recognize that word came from Freire, but it's commonly used. And I guess it was first used for Pak Moelyono's case in 1997 on an exhibition in Perth. The piece that Siti Adiati wrote, I think, from which Moelyono took the title or term to describe his own practice as briefly, was a review for an exhibition called Pameran Seni Rupa Dialogis Transformatif, exhibition of the dialogical transformative art. I mean, as a figure from a generation heavily influenced by Freire, this term remains relevant, of course, in readings of Moelyono's practice. But what I find interesting is in the case of Adiati's essay, Siti Adiati's essay, she didn't mention Freire at all. Later on, when I interviewed her, like about 2013 or something, she said that there was no urgency to theorize or immediately relate to a theory, because much like that title of the exhibition that she was reviewing, unfamiliar words would distance people from practice. I asked if you had if at the time she was reading Freire, and she was like, yeah, I of course I was reading it, but at the time I didn't completely relate it to Pak Mul's practice. So it was basically her trying to articulate Pak Mul's practice that the word came, which is, I think it's just interesting to sort of delve again later in relation to the fact that it is being installed as modules to be experienced in space. What kind of penyadaran comes out of the installation?
Thank you, Grace, for the additional, and also it reminds me about one thinker that also write about his work and using Freire was, if I'm not mistaken, it was Ibu Ratna Kapsari, ya, and also Ibu Tuti, almarhum Ibu Tuti. But I need to check the writing as well. So yeah, thank you for the information.
We can continue later on, and I am going to give the floor to Abby now.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Asep, for that amazing presentation, and to Farah and Rachel and Tita, also on and working with the panel. And thank you to Grace for this invitation to speak about a work and about an artist who I've had quite a long working relationship with and a friendship with, Maddie Leach. I'm speaking to you from Otautahi, from Christchurch in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It's nighttime here. I'm speaking from the office of the Physics Room Gallery, which is a small project space in Christchurch. We've been around since the 90s, and it's a not-for-profit public space where emerging and experimental practice is the priority. So hi everyone. So Maddie also is in another place. Maddie's in the morning. She's currently living in Sweden, where she teaches fine art at the HGK Valland Academy of Art and Design at the University of Gothenburg. I can't actually think how many years it would have been since we lived in the same city. And in many ways, I think it's conversations like this that affirms and reaffirms our connections and makes me look closely again at this work that, or these works, which exist primarily as a narrative, as an anecdote, rather than something material that I might visit or revisit in an exhibition. So thanks again for materializing this discussion, which I would argue is one symptom or one effect of works like this. We keep on needing to hold them, turn them over, look at them, return to them. And in a way, I think this perceived immateriality, or this defiance of a kind of object-centric logic, or the nature of some sculptural exhibitions, it sort of excites this proliferation of effects, material, relational, immaterial, and it challenges the borders of those categories too, which is something I'm very, very interested in. So that brings me to the discussion of Maddie's work, the Blue Spring Mata Air Murni. I'm just going to share a presentation so you can see some images of that work. So this work by Maddie.
Sorry, we can't see it yet, Abby. Now we see the top of your browser.
Oh, really? Okay. I'll just try that again. Hang on. How is this?
Yes.
Yay. Okay. So Maddie's work, The Blue Spring, was commissioned by Charles Escher for the 2015 Jakarta Biennale under the theme, Neither Forward Nor Back, Acting in the Present. I'd like to start with a disclaimer. I never actually saw this work, which feels both a little bit odd and maybe oddly fitting in this discussion of its relative elusiveness in terms of something that might be exhibited in a context like a biennale, and as such, easily recognizable as art or as commodity or as value. Whether this means it has no representational motive, as suggested in the provocation for this discussion, is something I'd argue. Quite the opposite, I think. I think this work is all about representation of a system, about acts of translation, economic, social, cultural. For me, this work is about materializing the translation acts of capitalism, but through this, offering something maybe stranger, something resistant to consumption, risk, the unexpected, or a generative absence. As such, rather than being solely invested in mundane day-to-day activities, this work relies, I would say, on an expansive imaginary of forms and narrative. So I'll start by briefly describing the work for those of you like me who haven't seen it. Maddie put forward, when invited to be part of the Biennale, Maddie put forward the proposition to transport 325 litres of water from a pristine freshwater spring, which you can see here on the screen, to Waiho in Putararu, which is in the North Island of Aotearoa, New Zealand, to Jakarta. Her intention was to give them to the Indonesian corporation Asia Pulp and Paper towards the production of and in exchange for 1 kg of standard issue office paper. At the time, the spring Te Waiho, or the Blue Spring as it's also known, was supplying 70% of New Zealand's bottled water, a major export managed by Kiwi Blue, which is in turn owned by Coca-Cola. The logic was one of equivalence or translation, two terms which are always at the heart of Maddie's project, I think. A simple question: how much fresh water was required to produce 1 kg of standard paper? In this case, the 325 litres. Or put another way, what does value look like as it shifts between geographic and cultural contexts? Maddie put it even more simply when we spoke recently. She said it was a way to get there from Aotearoa, where she was living at the time, to Jakarta. The simplicity of this equation, water in exchange for paper production, belayed the ultimately impossible task of intervening in, or at least navigating with any agency, the global system of trade. The barrels of water left New Zealand. There's 1 kg of paper in question. Here's the barrels of water leaving New Zealand. Travelled by a company called Divine Logistics to Jakarta, where they were stuck on the port and customs. They were sighted there, but they were not able to be released in time for the Biennale opening. There they are on the port, and you can just make out the two Maddie Leach, so we know it's the original barrels. What did materialise was the bulk matter of email correspondence generated in the course of the effort to get the water from a small town in New Zealand to the Biennale, some 592 pages in all. These were printed on APP copy paper and exhibited in the space alongside the now empty water barrels. A single email, which you can see on the wall here, with redactions was hung on the wall, and this one contained details of a conversation about the under-the-table payments that would be required for the release of the barrels from customs to get to the Biennale. The governance structures of the institutions involved, both on New Zealand side and on the Biennale, meant that this course was unable to be taken, and thus the water never entered the next stage in the process. I just want to read the list of materials here, just as a starting point in this discussion of the kind of fluid transition from the material forms in the exhibition to less material. So, as listed, 325 litres of water drawn from Te Waiho, 2 times 200 plastic drums, UN rated in transparent blue, custom made shipping pallet, sea freight journey from Port of Tauranga to Port of Jakarta via Singapore, email correspondence printed on 1 kg A4 copy paper manufactured by APP, single page with email dated 11/11/15. So that's what the work constitutes, I guess, in material terms. This is what you see in the space in this image. And it's very interesting to me how in this account, the documentation images take on a sort of heightened intensity. They become like evidence or a mechanism of proof that the project did really exist. Maybe no one read these emails. Maybe no one engaged with the minutiae of the narrative. But as Charles Esch noted subsequent to the work's realisation here, it's possible to look at this failure or this ellipsis of representation from another perspective maybe. He writes, it's important to allow some things to exist that can be discovered rather than promoted with the intensity that the market economy and ideas demands. So I'd like to raise 3 propositions in the reading of this work. Each offers a different way to understand it as an act of representation, the materialization of an idea. Something, yes, embedded in the mundanity of everyday transactions, certainly, but also that sustains fidelity to a central artistic idea with surreal, unexpected, or even highly politicized narrative consequences. Finally, I want to turn to that question of what can exhibitions do in response to the presence of works such as this. How can we host with the generosity to the artist's idea on one hand, and at the same time, with care for the audiences and their capacity to access such elusive work. So the first proposition is around a shift of logic, a logic shift to reckon with absence as something functional or something generative. Rather than seeing the absences in this exhibition space as a form of failure, a triumph of the mundane in the sense that something expressive or meaningful has not been extracted from this very prolonged process of transactions, what if we approach this space as fundamentally generative? Maddie recently introduced me to a term, functional absence, which she's adopted and adapted from art historian James Mayer's use of the term functional sight. And this has been really instrumental in her articulation of her own practice. In her words, functional absence plays an integral role in challenging, reorientating, or strengthening the project's logical operation and public reception. Just give you a picture back. That is, the absence of the water in the final outcome of this work, rather than marking its irresolution, instead stages a vivid encounter with the uncertainty of the artistic product in the first place, a displacement of energy and material, and perhaps most obviously, the decentering of the logic, of the capitalist logic of the product. This absence, or even series of absences in the process of the work, the final and most evident one being the absence of the water in the space, serves as an interruption in the project's narrative, compelling its rearrangement. The absence shifts the choreography of the whole. Maddie also expands on the idea of functional absence as part of her methodology, noting the persistent methodological tendencies in her artistic practice that combine an obstinate attachment to making something happen and willing cooperation with incompleteness, inconclusion, and variation. A central question arises of how commitment to an artistic decision is maintained while also leaving things undecided. When I asked her about this level of indecision, the handing over of individual agency to systems so disproportionately outscale, when I asked her if this was ever anxiety-inducing, Maddie described herself as having a high tolerance for risk, coupled with a deep interest in what is unaccounted for in a situation, what is unexpected, what is invisible and demands to be counted. In this sense, rather than a subtractive logic at play in this work, or positioning her work as minimalist in its intent, as it's often described, I suggest that the logic is in fact cumulative, expansive, fundamentally democratic, plural, even excessive or abundant in its logic. Decentering the teleological end of the project, resisting immediate legibility on representational terms, allows for a new reading to come into play. In my own understanding of Maddie's work, there is a strategic foregrounding of the thing or the material or the object, and a fundamental assertion that things occur or materialize within situations rather than an elevated isolation as an encounter with a more conventional sculptural practice might suggest. I would have titled this talk Through and With Everything Else. This is a paraphrasing from a text by Indigenous Māori scholar, Dr. Te Koiho Hoskins, and Pākehā settler academic Alison Jones, about the idea of the object itself as volitional, as happening or emerging in relation rather than being ontologically privileged in and of itself. They write, the identity of things in the world is not understood as discrete or independent, but rather emerges through and with everything else. It is the relational connection, not the thing in itself, that is ontologically privileged in Indigenous Māori thought. This comes from their 2016 paper, a mark-on paper. As Hoskins and Jones note, this is fundamental to Indigenous Māori worldview. Maddie is Pākehā, and this is not the worldview from which this work emerged. But as work produced within a global framework, the Jakarta Biennale, and drawing on source material from New Zealand, I suggest that such texts and perspectives are strongly relevant as a frame of reference in a local or personal reading of the work such as this. The second proposition, let's have a change of view. The second proposition is that the work expands our expectation of material representation. offering an understanding of materiality as embodying a continuum. I borrow this idea from the Australian artist and philosopher Terry Bird, who has written, "Immateriality is implied within the limits of materiality, neither beyond matter nor tied to a transcendent idea. Rather, it exceeds the confines or material limits, while at the same time being an effect produced by material operations." In simpler terms, I suggest that in a work such as Maddie's Blue Spring, the dichotomy of material and immaterial is less relevant than the assertion of the necessary interrelationship. Without the idea of water, the work would not exist. Without the effort to make it materialize, there would be no series of new relationships between previously unacquainted or indivisible things. I argue that the series of absences, inversions, or expectations unmet, set in motion by the water, makes space for a thinking through of the sculpture object as instead a sequence of relationships. Finally, I propose that in this work there is scope for a resistant reading, for a counter to dominant or colonial politics even, for something unpredictable that continues to shift with time. It's with this in mind that I turn finally to philosopher Carl Tahira Mika's writing on the counter-colonial politics implicit in the recognition of the agency of the material world. As such, there is not a clear self-world division, but a network of proximities. I return here to the water, the source from which this whole project started. I grew up near the spring in the Waikato region and near to the stories of its unsurpassed blueness, its clearness and coolness. The water sits in the domain of the Raukawa tribe, and as with many waterways in Aotearoa and internationally, it has been a contested site in recent years. In 2017, an application by New Zealand Pure Blue Springs to take 6.9 million litres of water a day from Te Waiho from the spring was withdrawn as Raukawa Iwi Settlement Trust declined to consent. I think this is a fitting epilogue to a project where it could be said that the water ultimately declined to appear. Perhaps it dematerialised of its own volition. To be clear, I'm not setting out to position Leach's work as just engaging with the debate around Indigenous relationship to and governance of natural resources in any explicit way, nor to the wider cultural politics it raises. Rather, my point is that in the work's origin in Aotearoa, it cannot but draw the discussion of the contested history of Aotearoa's land and resources into the discussion. Its presence in this sense is always a culturally located one and accountable to colonial relations. This too is materialised in this work. Final question, what can exhibitions do in the face of challenges presented by works like this, founded in the ordinary, but with no overriding will to materialise aesthetically or even at all in the exhibition space? I'm really interested in this discussion, less in the abstract, but more in the encounter with specific works and practices as each throws up its own series of conditions. An exhibition is, of course, a site in which value is circulated, exchanged, and through works like Maddie's, the system is revealed. What we do with this revelation is a question. Another question, would this work make any sense outside of an art space? Interestingly, I've always found Maddie's work very easy to talk about to a general audience, perhaps because of its strong relationship to narrative and to everyday materials and to pragmatic decision-making. So maybe that's all the exhibition can do, can continue to hold unique space with this kind of narrative. Thank you. That brings me to the end.
Thanks, Abby. Thank you so much. And also, I think my quick notes would be on noting that material and immaterial is relevant, at least in Maddie's case, and from there, I think we can sort of liberate the dichotomy between representation and non-representation, which is where this sort of topic departed from, and to rethink about generosity and how ideas can materialize in whatever forms, despite the forms, but it can still materialize. And maybe I want to flag that I saw the work, I experienced the work in space in the biennial, and in Gudang Sarina ecosystem, which was like a warehouse kind of setting, and it wasn't. As you were showing in the image, it was in like an unfinished room, or maybe leftover ruins kind of room that wasn't really cleaned for the exhibition. And stacks of paper stacked on the wall in a humid place like ours, you can see how the paper crust, and of course, yeah, you wonder whether you can touch it or not because it's an exhibition. But looking at it, because it's all like text in it, of course it's to be touched. But my immediate thought before I went into reading it, I already had in mind, probably because I'm like an art audience in that sense, I had in mind that this was the idea was something else. It didn't happen, and then it had to happen in this way. Failure in that sense, but failure doesn't always have to be bad. No, it becomes a completely different story. And before I started reading it, just by experiencing the space, and on the first page of the text, I was trying to sort of reconstruct what would have happened through the captions, actually. What could have happened if the first idea succeeded, or the initial, like the departing point of the idea succeeded. I think that was how I experienced it. And maybe later we can come back to, I think, failure and extending artists' generosity.
Thank you, Grace. Yeah. I think that idea of how to have integrity to the idea, but also be generous to those that encounter it is a very, it's like the question for curators.
Okay, so now I'm going to give the floor to Christy, which will present in recordings. Oh yeah, I also have to remind friends who are watching in YouTube and Facebook, you can write your comments now. You don't need to wait for the Q&A session. Comments, question, responses, and then our dear curatorial team will deliver it to us in the Zoom. Please continue, Rachel.
Hello. Firstly, I am recording this presentation from Australia. So I would like to acknowledge the traditional lands of the Ngunnawal people in which this recorded presentation is happening, as well as the Nyambri, the Nyaragu, and others who traded on, travelled through and connected to this land and continue to do so. I recognise all the custodians of this country throughout all lands, waters and territories, and I pay my respects to the elders, past, present and emerging. Sovereignty was never ceded. So my name is Christy Monfries, and my apologies for not being there for the live presentation, but hopefully some aspects of this project will prompt some questions later in the open forum section of the presentation. I was invited to discuss the Trash Squad project, which was a work developed and executed by Wok The Rock, otherwise known as Wok The Rock, a figure that has deep history with the Indonesian punk and experimental music communities in Java and across the Indonesian archipelago. Wok is also a curator. He's a punk musician, a music label boss of the Yes No Wave. He also ran regular music events at the Yes No Club that were key in supporting a very emerging new music scene out of Indonesia, and to a further extent helped to sort of put Southeast Asian music within the realm of contemporary music. So this work, Trash Squad, was first presented at the Jakarta Biennale in 2013. It plays itself out at several 7-Elevens across Jakarta. And in this very public arena, and what Wok refers to as the imagined state or shadow stage, with his self-described approach, much like a theatre work or a live artwork presented outside of the gallery white cube context. The 7-Elevens in Indonesia are used very differently than in other parts of the world. They are a public, democratic and affordable meeting space where people from all parts of society and age demographics converge to smoke, eat snacks and to drink beer. These spaces are used for socialising and often even for business meetings. It is essentially the one place where no one is locked out of. It is a space that everyone can afford and is in this sense a very accessible and inclusive place. So this is a space where rich Jakartan kids would mingle with punk kids from a lower socioeconomic background. This very democratic space, which was then used as a site for Wok's Trash Squad project, and he gathered the Jakarta punk community that were already hanging out at the 7-Eleven to rally around and to form Trash Squad. Their purpose as an organisation was then to clean the 7-Elevens. This imagined stage come live art performance would begin by these punks hanging out as if they normally would, consuming food and drink from the 7-Eleven, then putting on their Trash Squad uniforms, raising the anarchy flag, singing the Trash Squad anthem, then beginning the work of cleaning the 7-Eleven. They would end their shift by another round of punk songs, and this would signify the end of the shift. The Trash Squad had a second site, which was the administration office located in the basement of Taman Ismail Marzuki in Jakarta. The administration office was used to coordinate shifts, log who was absent, and to pay the workers' salaries. So this admin office clearly functioned as the visual archive and gallery exhibition of performance with artefacts and detritus of the project, which included salary slips, brooms, cleaning products, absentee forms, and work rosters and calendars, and also including how the budget was spent and how much was being paid per worker. Everyone that worked for Trash Squad was given a choice of working an evening or afternoon shift, 3-hour shifts in total. However, this was based on an hourly wage because not everybody could do the full 3 hours. These salaries were not based on a national wage scale, as at the time one didn't exist. However, it was discussed among the group as a collective how this money would be budgeted with an agreed hourly rate. The money came from the Jakarta Biennale, which essentially was from the public purse, filtered through the Indonesian tax office. Discussions early on in the project amongst the project curator and the punk collectives were centred around how this project was funded. According to anarchist punk principles, taking money from the government would go against the anarchist path, and many of the punk collectives did not want to be part of a project that was considered part of a government system. But strangely, after much discussion, the consensus was that it was the people's money and conversely, absolutely should be used to produce this work as a productive way to contribute to society, and even more so in a country where tax money is often grossly misused. Capitalism and anarchy are naturally in opposition in this project, whether it was the intention of the project curator or not. 7-Eleven, which is an international symbol of the multinational corporation, as a site of a live artwork that employs punks, whose core truth is to reject illegitimate authority and to disintegrate capitalism using taxpayers' money. So 7-Eleven, according to Wikipedia, started in Dallas, was bought by a Japanese corporation and now operates franchises and licenses 71,100 stores in 17 countries with 166 stores in Indonesia, which makes this this iconic shop truly a multinational corporation. However, in the context in which it operates in Indonesia, has been co-opted by the people into an affordable hangout space. So what are anarchist principles? Well, essentially it means rejection of illegitimate authority. So authority that is institutionalized within a nested structure where the commands from the top come from the top and where the power is centralized. Conversely, what is considered legitimate authority is a person who may have knowledge or a skill set that contributes to society, like authority on history or somebody who might have a PhD in science. Anarchy also opposes wage labour, otherwise known as capitalism, meaning a group of people who owns the means of production, hire people's labour to make things for them in exchange for a wage. If you don't work for them, you don't get paid, and you're basically poor and you have no money, which is a class system that is considered to be another form of centralised power. So what is a conundrum in Trash Squad is that it brings to the project punk communities that inherently, through their anarchist principles, should oppose a 7-Eleven as a symbol of global capitalism. However, instead, this community already spends their time hanging out there. And then are prepared to clean the 7-Elevens using taxpayers' money as a performance art piece. The use of the funds, which was discussed as a group, with everyone having an equal say, is actually a decentralised decision-making process. However, the system in which it was paid would most likely be considered capitalistic. So the performance of Trash Squad brings up all kinds of discussion points, such as what does anarchy actually mean in this context? The collective nature of this project, where the theatre of this performance is played out within a very capitalistic site that is in reality functions as a non-hierarchical site where people from different socio-economic situations can mingle doing essentially nothing, so i.e. not producing anything. This project also comments on the use of the public purse and tax money, that it should be used for art interrogations that essentially provide a public service, sanitation of spaces that these punk communities see as maybe the only place they feel welcome and can afford, and the profits from the selling of Trash Squad merchandise were also used to pay for punk shows, to further the music community's needs, and to fund the health needs of many individual punks in the communities that could not afford healthcare. So this collision between life and art and the blurring of what is real and what is produced, and as a site of the prompting of public discussion, as Wok had discussed with me the other day, a few people who were witnessing it and didn't know what was going on actually asked, and they had a good discussion about theatre and performance in public spaces. So it also prompted discourse around like what is considered art with the public who are in those spaces. So this project seems to have many more questions than answers. So I'm hoping that some of these points might be discussed or incorporated within the open Q&A sessions. I'd also like to apologise again for not being there in person, but I would like to leave you now with some documentation of Trash Squad, which was taken in 2013 at one of the 7-Eleven sites in Jakarta. Thank you, and speak to you later. Bye.
Oh ya, aku video dulu ya. Saya sambil. Oke. Frame gitu ya. Ya. Banyak tuh, pakai kostumnya. Gimana kan? Kita peduli tentang kotoran semua. Kita peduli walau kau tak suka, itu sudah biasa. Oi, oi, oi. Seperti itu tadi.
Ada izinnya mau Pak? Ya kalau nggak ada izinnya kita nggak bisa.
Kita bantuin bersihkan aja.
Kita nggak bisa soalnya. Maaf ya. Maaf banget. Maaf ya nggak bisa. Nanti karyawan yang kena. Maaf banget.
Kita bantuin ngebersihin.
Nggak bisa. Ya. Maaf.
Nggak boleh. Iya. Nggak boleh. Nggak boleh. Nggak boleh ya udah. Iya nggak boleh. Tanggung. Nggak apa-apa, santai aja. Enak nih. Nggak apa-apa, enak aja. Di teater. Wah. Ya, ask me. Okay. We help. Nggak boleh. Thank you. Boleh. Tapi kita tetap nyanyi ya. Kita bantu aja. Bersih. Oh, foto-foto. Ya, maaf ya, Mbak. Iya. Tapi kalau bersih-bersih nggak apa ya, Mbak? Bersih, Mbak. Boleh saya ambil? Oh, gitu. Udah 3 hari kan? Wah, udah ada ini kan ya. Kita peduli dengan kotoran semua. Kita tak peduli walau kau tak suka, itu sudah biasa. Apa-apaan dong? Foto. Ayo, jatuh dulu dong. Jatuh dulu dong. Ada yang di bawah kali, so.
Mari Juki. Bajimu, satu kali.
Cool. We still don't have Christy here, but I think we can start talking amongst us, no? Can we put everyone on? Yay, Asep's connection is fine. Was it okay?
Yeah, it's okay. It's not bad.
Chita and Rachel, please just put in the questions or comments in the chat if you find them in YouTube or Facebook. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, we already have a question.
Yeah, please.
From Sid.
Hi,
Should I
Sid.
get it? Or
Yeah, please.
Well, I will do both. So, ultimately, what consequences or purpose did the practices of Moelyono, Maddie, and the anarchist collective in what gathered from the exhibition of their practices in the Biennale? Did their participation make way for policies to be discussed, discussions to be made in a civic level? I ask because obviously they seem to have autonomous practices, but what came through as an effect of their Biennale involvement in the civic spheres they operate in? So who wants to go first?
Bisa dikopas nggak? Can you?
In the chat. I already.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was so fast, Chit.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I can't speak for Christy, but I can, while Asep and Abby think about their responses, I can speak a bit about Wok's work, because I also interviewed him for a different occasion, but we spoke about this work. And I remember when I first read it's not something I remember from the exhibition, but what I read from his Trash Squad Tumblr, which documents everything actually from the I think meetings process up to snippets of negotiations, who to be paid how much, and all that. His description of the project really speaks about the fact that the biennial is a government program, and that of course not all the money is taxpayers' money, but still it has an aspect of taxpayers' money. So that was something that were being openly discussed and addressed, which is something that Christy also mentioned. How it would affect policy and changes and all that, I don't really know, but the fact that it is being talked out loud amongst the participants of the project of Trash Squad, which are the punk community and the organizers of the biennial, I think starts a different like conversation on how we use this money. That categorically or organizationally we would call the artist production fee, no? And one thing that I regret not asking Wok is, did he also use his artist fee for making this project happen? Wok said he would come and be with us. If you are there, you can also write in the comments.
Yeah, maybe I can try to answer the question. I do think that this, in regard to Moelyono's practice, I think it goes the other way around, because the actual activities have been conducted like long before the presentation at the Biennale. And of course, by saying that the question about this participation make way for policies, for example, to be discussed or discussion to be made in a civic level. I think what has been done was actually the action itself. So maybe for the discussion, we need to, of course, we need to check like how further this, particularly this work in the Biennale. But apart from the presentation, I remember that there was also quite interesting discussion or public program that specifically talking about the education, not only art education, but education in general in regard to Moelyono's presentation in the Biennale. I hope that answered, Grace.
I was also thinking that at least in Moelyono's ECCD approach, he learned it from India, as I recall. Yeah, as he learned it from India early 90s, after he had already started making these play groups in different places. He had already started that. Then he got, because he also works with NGOs, he was sent to sort of learn about this method. And when he was making all these play groups in various places in the whole archipelago, actually, it wasn't the way we are using it now. It wasn't being used. Now it's incorporated by the government as a legitimate method for teaching playgroups. So, I mean, I don't think we have done enough research to say that that was because of Moelyono, or we would need to be able to say that. I don't know. What do you think, Asem? Do we need to be able to say that?
I don't think that's necessary to think like that, or maybe to say that. But one that make me at least believe in this kind of practice is that then the artist's involvement or the artist's purpose in the society now can be seen, even though it's very small part, you know. So maybe as I said in the presentation, these activities involve many individual organization, but in the art presentation we only see Moelyono. But if we look more further, Moelyono maybe only small percentage of the whole activities, but that small percentage is the one that makes very much impact on the thing that has been done.
I can also have a go to answer this. Yeah, it's a good question. I think in terms of the consequences, something really fundamental that it did, and perhaps this is true of many works from New Zealand in an international context, is some enhanced visibility of what these international relationships look like, not just art relationships or the surrounding context for art as such, but for example, that was the first time really that I recognized the significance of 70% of all our bottled water being sent offshore, bought by Coca-Cola, the revelation of these kind of statistics and where our real some of these sort of alliances are. I think also the limits of it sort of exposed the limits of the, I don't know what you call this, the like ways that public money can be used. Also, when it came to the discussion, which was included in the email I mentioned on the wall of the space, the discussion about what might be needed to gain the release of the works from customs. There was limits in the way that that kind of money could be paid out under the table, given that this project was supported by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade from New Zealand, and then also the Biennale, of course. There were many, the kind of limits to the translatability of capital were kind of reached there, I think, and that was definitely yeah, that was something that was a consequence of the work that we're able to see that. There's one other thing. Oh, this is not directly consequential of the work, but in the kind of surrounding discourse, I guess it's interesting to me that, you know, as I mentioned, like now this work would certainly not be able to be made. It wouldn't be, well, there'd be a very different set of relationships, I would imagine, at stake in terms of sourcing that water in the first place. So when we look back at this work, I guess we can sort of recognize the shift in understanding of relationship to resources, which I think the work's sort of cognizant of, and now looking back on 2015, it exposes that shift, which is like a culturally significant one for New Zealand at least. Yeah, didn't make change in a sort of civic sphere, but these are big cultural shifts, and no means like initiated by the work, but certainly it's that the work is participant in that discourse, I think.
Can I ask Asep if you can say something about Abby's work, because you were involved in that biennial? I know you weren't the ones directly taking care of that. I did quite a number of interviews with Putra, with Charles, and also with, I think, Vicky and MG. No, I didn't speak to MG. I spoke to Vicky, who were sort of dealing with the process of the work. But I wonder if you can say something about it.
Unfortunately, Grace.
Or as you remember it.
Yeah, I think this is unfortunately I cannot give further comment, because the first as you said, it was the process was mainly with Charles as a curator for the project. So it's not directly with me or with any other curators. But also the second one is that I was I lived Jakarta right like before the opening of the exhibition. So same with AB, I didn't see the actual work myself either.
Yeah, I forgot. I forgot.
Yeah.
You went. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I just remembered that you were one of the curators. Sorry.
Yeah. I only know from text and documentation, but not like, I understand your question as a direct, experience. But unfortunately, I didn't have that privilege.
If we don't yet have questions from both YouTube and Facebook, can I ask if Abby have questions for Asep? Or we can talk amongst us, I think.
I wanted, Asep, just if you could briefly, I suppose, in thinking about the way that these things translate in an exhibition context, could you just touch on the decisions that were made about what was exhibited and how that was positioned, like as a document of this process or as part of the work, like how that was kind of positioned in the exhibition?
Which exhibition, sorry? 2015?
Yes.
Pak Moelyono. Okay. So, in specifically in Pak Moelyono's work, it was very loose decision-making process, I would say, because I remember that the conversation between curators and not curators, artistic team of Jakarta Biennale 2013 with Pak Moelyono was only happens twice, or twice, I think, maximum. And for the presentation, they only limit to that number, maximum 1,000 modules, and with the allocated spaces. But the discussion or decision-making process for the installation pretty much also happen on site. So it's not that there is no, I would say there is no like specific interference as well from the artistic team. But on the other hand, this has also become problematic because for Pak Moelyono, this is for the first time. It was for the first time, and at some point, I think it could be different if the curator had our artistic team had the time to have more conversation with the artists, because if we see the whole exhibition, I remember exactly the installation by Wok The Rock was exactly in front of Pak Mul, or maybe like 3 meters on the left, but it was like it's not really like an exhibition, especially in that area. In that area, it's installation. It's everyday objects. Maybe if you go like further to the left, it was there was some photography or painting, but maybe 70-80%, I would say the installation was the decision by the artist himself.
The reason I ask, I guess, is I was thinking a lot, particularly in Christie's presentation, about the immediacy of these projects that happen in public or in social space, and then how subsequently to that the exhibition can seem like this sort of distancing mechanism where there's only a document or a trace or something residual of that experience. And I think, yeah, it's quite an interesting challenge in the sense that one instinct is to try and make experience happen in the exhibition space and represent that, or recreate even that immediacy. And the other is to perhaps, I guess, in a work like Maddie's, there's a sense in which the absence already exists. You know, it's already distant. That kind of loss or the kind of grief of where is the object, where is real life, has already happened. That kind of event of loss. So in a way, even though there wasn't so much to see in her space, I would argue that kind of, I don't know, the rupture between real life and what you see in the exhibition space is less evident. But of course, I did not see the exhibition, but I'm just very aware of how when things happen in public space and then they translate into public, but exhibition space, in some ways they sometimes like congeal or like become something solid and static and kind of a husk of what they were in the living environment. I guess it's just a challenge I'm interested in. I definitely don't have an answer.
Also from my interview with, this is also something that I asked to Christy after we recorded the presentation, but I'm not gonna quote her on this. It's a conversation I also had with Wok, actually. What was the necessity of putting the office in the biennial? That was, I think, how I framed my question to him, because I could imagine however minimal budget that is spent into making the installation. It was a great solution, I think, that to put the office there because it becomes like an anchor to their day-to-day activities. He basically was saying that it was the request of the biennial to have the space there, to have the installation there, or else it could have worked only as a theater that happened on in the different 7-Elevens. So I guess that's a negotiation between the need to make an exhibition.
Yeah.
But
understanding. Yeah. I guess sometimes if you're thinking of the work as like this dynamic series of things as opposed to something that's held in a kind of static object in some way, I was thinking of this metaphor of like the work like alights in the exhibition or perches for a moment, but it also there's a continuity of effects that happens or things that happen before, during, and after, and they'll just never be in the exhibition space, and that's just a limit. It's a kind of a that's its reality. I was thinking too, like with Maddie's work subsequent to the exhibition, a publication was bound of all the emails. I understand a kind of blue hardcover solid object came out of it, and there's a question there of like the timeliness, like that. Yes, there was this object, this beautiful consumable object, but it had missed the time framing of the exhibition. And I think there's quite interesting politics there as well, where it's like sort of alighting the scope of the exhibition. It's suggesting a different kind of cycle of time, which of course is like, that's how time is, you know. The exhibition time is in a way a very vulnerable, kind of fragile construct, eh?
Duration in relation to exhibitions. We have about 10 more minutes, and Maddie actually left a comment on Facebook. Thank you, Abby, for such an astute set of observations about this work for Jakarta Biennale 2015. Amazing. Where do we move to? I feel a bit ambiguous between like wanting to still speak about the exhibition, but feeling egoistic to do it, because it is also about, I think it's about the artists and their works, while constantly navigating like, how do we put this in space? Or sometimes even, why do we need to put this in space? I guess that's where the question on non-representation, or like that's where I rooted that question from, because like Wok's work, it really can just happen. And in Maddie's case, the book became like a non-durational, a more everlasting kind of form to the work in comparison to the exhibition.
And also one that could go back into systems, so it could go into these various public libraries. So in a way, it sort of maintains a principle of accessibility, even though, of course, you know, there's like an edition of 12 and access is restricted in that way, of course. Yeah, I don't know. I think there's still this space for the exhibition to hold, in terms of it is essentially unlike any other space in the world. And I'm not sure if that like justifies its existence, but it must be tested by each exhibition and say, or each, not exhibition, sorry, each project, and say to, the exhibition must justify its existence as a form each time a project comes along and comes into encounter with it. Because if it's merely like a kind of site for an archive or something, that doesn't, for a contemporary archive, it doesn't seem enough, because the archive already exists. You know, if an exhibition is holding the kind of space that nothing else can, that it feels like we can justify its existence in a kind of moment like this.
I have been accused, in quote, of being existentialist by asking these questions on exhibition. It's okay, Asep. Great to have you back.
What do you think, Grace? I mean, what do you think about these? Do you have some sort of propositional answer to the question of how to, in general terms, how to exhibit practices like this? Is there a point, do you think?
I like to, there's something that I keep repeating. I like to frame exhibitions, or call exhibitions as, treat exhibition as pause. It's pause, it's not stop, it's not destination. It's a pause from practice, from working, because it is a space to exhibit. So it's pause in that sense. You get to consolidate what you've done and find ways to allow other people into it. It can never be holistic, I think. But you allow people to enter from certain point of views, and then you get to hear what they think about it and how you can continue, I think, with it. But to a certain extent, this also may sound pretty abstract. But that's how I see it.
I think that's an interesting way. I mean, it's sort of like bringing oxygen into the project in some way. And even though I understand it does sound kind of abstract, but as soon as you're in the room with an exhibition, it is like the opposite of abstract. You know, it's a very real, to try and have any kind of real dialogue with someone who comes to see the show about what it's about or why it's there. That's like a very real encounter. And I think, that's like a healthy pause in practice. Just check if it does matter still.
In social media times like now, I even like to observe hashtags that are used in like taking pictures or even selfies in front of a work or in the context of an exhibition, because it is a kind of reaction or response to what is being presented. Chita, do you want to read it, Chita, or do I have to read it for you?
Yeah, I just put it in text first to make sure I don't. Yeah, sorry, it's more like a comment instead of a question. I think it seeing the documentation for the first time, I think it's really fascinating to see how in Wok's case it's really different, because remembering Mas Asep remarks about Pak Moelyono's work, because in Wok's case, yeah, I can see that he's clearly part of the punk community and he has the way to work with these people, with everyone involved, and that people even seems to revolve around him. So I think that there's also an individual quality that makes the artwork works. Maybe you can call that the artist charm that he possesses. Like it will not work if someone else does it. Yeah, only he can do it that way, perhaps. Yeah. Yeah, I think in works like this, the artist's individual quality always plays an important role, because it really tells how he would treat people that work with him to create this artwork.
In modules that Pak Moel make, I often wonder if it can. I mean, clearly the ACCD is now a system that is used by playgroups everywhere, but in how the playgroups that he built, he was the one communicating to the teachers, which are basically mothers in the villages. Yes, modules came out of it. There's even alat peraga edukasi. What's that in English? Educational.
Education. Apa ya?
Peraga. What is peraga? Exhibit? Like tools for education, basically.
Tool or kits.
Kit, educational kit. There are educational kits which was being displayed in the exhibition. I still don't know how it would work with someone else doing it, actually. And yeah, I don't know how this can relate to Maddie.
I think I will try to respond this question. Yeah, maybe it's not the direct answer, but to respond to this question first of all, I think or I believe that Pak Moel and Mas Wok approach the community, punk community or people in Singkawang, not quote unquote as an artist. So the question about the artist charm maybe not suitable for this position, because as we know that Pak Moelyono introduced himself as a teacher, as people that also create the module together. If the module is the thing that make this activity happens, then Pak Moelyono also actually learning from mothers, from parents in the local context, because he cannot do it alone. As sebutnya a facilitator, he needs other people too. So I don't know, it's word patronizing correct to use that in this practice, because both Mas Wok, I think, and Pak Moel maybe didn't even introduce themselves as an artist or the one that has the authority for making piece of artwork, for example.
An additional comment from Maddie. The book was sent to the government organizations that supported production of the work. Something about the need for some kind of evidence of the complexities that unfolded. Interestingly, the New Zealand embassy in Jakarta sent it back to me. And I think earlier Grace mentioned about conversing more about failures and artist generosity. I think it'd be interesting to hear more about that. Oh, do you want to comment on that first, Abby? Then we have reached the time to end the conversation because it's late for Abby. And we have to continue the day. Asep also have to continue his day.
It's okay for me. Yeah, I think these terms are really important. I guess I sort of see the work in its entirety as a kind of act of generosity of the artist. It's, I guess, you know, the materialization of an idea is what is always happening with creative practice. But then the idea of almost drawing out that process and putting intense labor into every phase of it to make it material, I think, I don't know, it's a different type of act of creation. I suppose I feel a bit resistant when these acts or these types of works get framed in like a very, very conceptual way, because I think that takes them out of the realm in which they were born and they exist, and the kind of primary location of all the activity. Just to go quickly back to that question of authorship, like I think there's a generosity in the, I don't know what you call this, kind of diffusion of the authorship, so that there's so many players that have an active participation in the creation of this work. In Maddie's case also, there's negotiations at every level in order to practically achieve, or not achieve as it were, but in order to initiate and sustain the movement of this idea. So I think there's generosity there. I suppose the difficulty is when the audience walks through the door and how they are able to encounter that work, and whether there's a sense of generosity in that moment, given the, I don't know, the sort of historical momentum of contemporary art to be elite or to be not accessible. How does this project kind of remember its roots in the everyday, or in all these sort of processes of quite ordinary transaction? As I mentioned, like I think Maddie's work is quite particular in this respect. Whenever I do, it exists a lot in anecdote and in conversation, and whenever I do talk about this work, I feel like there's many points of entry, and that people relate in one way or another, because it has so many possible lateral kind of threads. It's not centered in one like perfect genius form or something like that. So I suppose I think it's inherently generous, but whether or not the exhibition space is able to kind of continue that sort of gesture of generosity, I think is very much in the I don't know, in decisions of the artist and the curator about how it's able to be in the space, how it's not saying like it's not sort of presenting like a kind of sheer surface. Yeah, it's able to maintain this kind of porous, many narratives being in the exhibition space.
I was thinking about maybe if we replace what Chita mentioned as artist charm to generosity, it will change the remarks that she made before, because when I think of exhibitions as pauses, it's in a way to is the wrong word. Or maybe it's the right word. It's allowing failures. It's accepting failures. That in practices, it's okay, or it's common to face failures, and from there it doesn't necessarily. I guess I'm also against the idea of productivity, that refuses failures, that only accepts success, and don't seem to have space to face failures. I guess we can still work. We can still make exhibitions that allow people to learn or experience failure differently, I think, and this as a way to extend artist generosity. Hopefully. Always.
I mean, I think there's like, yeah, I don't know if it's generosity, but it's a proposition that's like counter to this capitalist logic of like ending up in a successful product that makes space for more people, for more, you know, a more kind of empathetic space of possibility if you see represented failure or disruption or absence or some of the things that are human experience as opposed to kind of capitalist propaganda.
Let's end this here for now with capitalist propaganda in the end, because I don't think we can conclude, and I don't, or I'm not the moderator that concludes things. Asep, if you have something else to say.
Yeah, maybe a little bit respond to the last. I don't know. This is not a really question, but about the failure. Yeah, at some point, I think failure is one of the key aspects that has been discussed in this kind of relational works, I believe, and in some cases, the artist also can predict this could happen, right? So it's expected failures, I would say, and because for project, the process and the interaction could be more important than the end product or the real object. That's why the idea of presenting documentation, etc., it's also important. But in the case of Moelyono, I think in exhibition space, you can allow failure, for example, for presentation, for curatorial approach, etc. But in real life, you cannot allow failures because it's about a real life situation. It's for the children, for the future. So that's why I think developing this method is very seriously taken, not only for artistic expression, but it's education, it's critical thinking. So maybe I see that two different things about failures, yeah, Grace, for in Moelyono's case.
Do you have something else, Abby, before I end, or?
I hear a rooster in the background there.
Yeah. Abby's last note is it's an important distinction, the two failures.
Yeah, I mean, you can't, this idea of failure, like in a way it's kind of decadent, that it's something that is enabled in an exhibition space or in an art practice. It's like a luxury that couldn't be and shouldn't be a priority in other spaces, I suppose, like particularly in when there's like real life application, like education or I think that's really, it's really easy to get carried along this like celebration of the failure, but of course like it's very context contingent where that's allowed. Hey, to finish, can I show you guys, I have a short video clip
please.
It's just of the blue spring, and I just think it's like a very good thing for us to go away with. I'll just share my screen if I can.
It's wait.
Hold on, one sec. I think you can probably see the shadow of the artist standing there on the bridge looking down, but also this is probably something like, I think this was taken back in 2015, but this will be what it's like, well, in the light tomorrow or today.
Thank you, Abby. There's one more from Maddie. Depends on how we think who is audience, not just those who visit the exhibition space. Warm thanks to you all for this conversation. Best wishes from Gothenburg. That's a great note actually to continue to the next month, end of this month actually, conversation on audience. It is something that we also started talking about or in the earlier phase of the biennial. I think last December we had conversations about berpihak kepada publik tuh apa ya? Taking the public stance, something like that.
Siding with the public.
Siding with the public. Siding with the public is nicer. Thank you, Chita. Yeah, so again, I want to apologize on behalf of Christy, who could not join the discussion due to work emergencies. And to end, I want to thank the team behind the screen, JJ, Chamai from the multimedia team. My clock is reminding me it's 15 hours. To Farah and the management team, Rachel and Chita, also Sally and Chingy, the curatorial team, definitely the panelists, Christy, Asep, and Abby, and all of you for being with us in Facebook and YouTube. And I hope we will see you next month, end of this month, August 31, with Vera May, Cassandra, and Pitra Hutomo. We will keep you updated via our social media lines, Instagram and Facebook, and definitely the curatorial blog. Please make time to look at it. Blog.jakartabiennale.id that also shares our thinking and working process. Thank you again, everyone.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you, Abby.
Thank you,
Cita,
everyone.
Rasa, Mas EJ.
Boleh dimatiin ya.